exploded. They pissed him off with Watchmen and all that
They
stuff.
should have given him Superman rather than John.
Yeah.
That was the key. He's the guy to do Superman. He could have brought Superman back to the ultimate glory.
Well,
Yeah.
That was a big mistake.
And you had the pleasure of doing a wonderful non-Swamp Thing issue with DC Presents, which has
With
Superman.
Superman.
Al Williamson and
And talking with that one, because we were on the phone all together. He's totally loved the early Superman from the 60s. That is his text.
And his Dave Gibbons album, or annual, was fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Miracle Man had a lot of that.
Those two things he did with, or that one he did with Gibbons about the rose, the present for
Emmanuel's everything.
Yeah. What a masterpiece.
Before we continue, though, one of the other things about the DC Universe that I love was my buddy Mike Royer is here, but your version of Etrigan.
oh, I love the Demon.
When did you look at it, though, and say, I love this character, this is my, you got to do...
Oh, when I was reading it, when it was a new comic from Jack Kirby. John came in with more love for Swamp Thing than I think any of us initially. I mean, you really loved the character.
Yeah,
I was hooked on the Demon, and I loved that issue too with the camera, with the monkey shapeshifter. And John and I had suggested the plot that Alan worked with. In fact, my first wife, Marlene, was working at a school for autistic children. Alan came to Vermont, went to the school, which was Green Meadow School in Wilmington, Vermont, and those people in that Demon story were co-workers of Marlene, so we drew them into the book. But yeah, I love the Demon. And John and I, both of the Demon, when we started playing with sketches, you had this whole cat thing you wanted to bring.
Well, yeah, I mean, we worked up all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And we really wanted to do more with the Demon. He's a weird character. Like John and I, when we were working on these crossovers, I mean, all the DC supernatural characters, we were doing the annual and we realized that they all have no eyeballs, so they're all like Little Orphan Annie, right? Most of them wear little pointed booties. I mean, none of this stuff is fear-inducing. And, the Demon is the color of a yield sign and a stop sign put together. This isn't atmospheric stuff. So we had fun trying to subvert that and make it effective. And Alan got right on board with it. I mean, Alan took it even further.
Well, there was, just before we did that, wasn't there an issue of, I don't know, what is it?
World's Finest
or something that had Superman teaming up with the Demon, and in the last panel they're shaking hands.
Yeah. In fact, Len Mean wrote that one and Joe Kubert drew it. And it was Len who introduced the Demon Etrigan speaking in rhyme. But it was Alan who looked at that. It was doggerel in that World's Finest. But Alan looked at it and went, he's going to speak like a Shakespeare sonnet, and made it work. I mean, Alan's dialogue for Etrigan was just elegant.
Real
flows.
impressive. I remember
You
that.
guys were also reading some horror writer who was really good. Book
Clive-
of Blood.
Clive Barker, The Books of Blood. Alan was buying the Sphere paperbacks as they came out, the original Books of Blood. There were 6 of them that came out in England. And Alan was buying copies and mailing them to John and to me. And like, you guys got to read this. And, I was reading Ramsey Campbell, Peter Stroud. My whole argument was we should be doing a comic that appeals to Stephen King readers. Why are we messing around? So anyway, that was part of why I bristled at the superhero thing. I mean, to me, that was an intrusion. And in fact, I expressed it so strongly that Alan and Len lied, saying Len had made Alan bring them in. And more, I would call Rick if they were superheroes, like a page of Green Lantern in issue 24. I didn't want to draw Green Lantern. Rick came down to my studio and did that.
I just take some home, because I was working on the one at the time.
That's right. You love superheroes. Yeah.
One of my other favorite issues, number 53, which is a oversized, supposedly all John.
It is on.
Batman and
Well,
Swamp
there's
Thing.
6 pages that Rick penciled in that too.
There you go.
How long did that take? That is just a gorgeous piece of work issue of comics, storytelling.
I mean,
How long did that take?
probably took like 2 months. I don't know. I wasn't working on a regular book at that point.
And Alan's scripts were that on the show. I mean, talk about foreign to today's comic market, that you had scripts in that you could say, okay, now in 53 I've got here, I'm going to take this, I'll see you in 2 months, or that you had the time, the scripts were there. What a weird comic.
No, you took the time.
You took the time.
Yeah.
You guys had left the...
Yeah.
I took over with
50 was the last one.
And it was all, everything was ragged. You were like, blown out.
Oh, yeah.
by the whole experience. And so I was
And there's
taking
also
over.
that whole experience of the American Gothic, which was a lot, I mean, part of what we bristled at too was once it was formalized into every issue, it's gonna be a new American horror thing, we kind of started losing interest at that point too. 'cause
Who
it got
needs formula? Yeah, who needs
Here's our
formula?
series.
These guys don't need formula. Regular mortal artists and writers, they want a formula, so they know what they're doing with it. These guys aren't into that.
But the other thing too, I mean, Rick, while you were working on Alan on that, what was he was writing Watchmen. Alan was batting these issues of Swamp Thing out of the park between,
He was
oh,
on
I'm working
fire.
on Watchmen, oh,
Yeah.
I'm
He was on
finishing V
fire.
for Vendetta.
Yeah.
Pretty much every script I would get from him would start with a phone call and him saying, I don't have a bloody idea. And we would just sort of talk about old comics we loved and things like that, and I might try to suggest something, but basically it was just a conversation about things
Yeah.
to get him going. There were only 2 or 3 that I actually, like, My Blue Heaven, that was my idea.
Right,
But of course,
you suggested Adam Strange initially, but
Yeah.
Alan loved Adam
everybody loved all that
Strange.
as well, yeah.
So yes, and so issue 21 now, Swamp Thing's in space. And 51?
Or 50.
51,
Yeah.
yeah, 51 is where
And,
this
and
started.
now you're on board on a more of a monthly or.
With my name on it.
With your name on it.
Yeah.
Swamp Thing went into space in 54, or 54 or 55, because he gets killed in 53.
Yeah.
Right.
He doesn't have
Heaven.
any place to go.
Right.
So he's
Blown off the planet.
Yeah.
Right.
And so now it's your time to carry on. And now
As a
you're
penciler.
As a
Yeah,
penciler.
right.
And Steve, you're now.
We were working on other stuff.
Cover artist.
Well, I did cover art, but my bread and butter was taboo by that time. I was really in love with editing and packaging and publishing initially taboo, which we won't get into. That's another ball of wax. My focus was still horror comics. I still felt like we hadn't punched a hole in that yet.
You were really angry at DC too. You had.
Yeah, over things I can't discuss, but they can. So go if
No, I'm not gonna go.
No, I mean DC really. We've at least 2 of us up here have been through real meat grinders with DC, where it gets family involved. And I was angry. And I was also angry, which I didn't find out till later. We were still working at the lowest page rates at DC, which I didn't realize until I did 4 pages of Ambush Bug. How many of you remember Ambush Bug? Right?
Every issue.
Ambush Bug. I did 4 pages because Keith Giffen and I were friends, and Keith wanted me to do a sequence. And I send in my voucher, and Julie Schwartz, the editor, calls me and says, Steve, I'm tearing up this voucher. And I'm like, why? I really need the check. And he goes, is this what you're being paid on Swamp Thing? You guys are getting the lowest rate that's being paid at the company. And he said, let me have Keith put the voucher through for you. And they were paying me twice what I got on Swamp Thing to do 4 dumb Ambush Bug pages, right? And it was later that I found out, John and I got approached by one of our old classmates, John Bissette, who was in your class or Tim's class?
He was 3rd year.
Right, so John Bisson is a Kubert School student with Tim Truman. John Bisson went into special effects makeup, and he contacted John and I saying, I'm putting in a bid to do the makeup for Return of the Swamp Thing, the sequel to the Swamp Thing movie. Can you guys send me some drawings? So John and I sent John Bisson some drawings. You drew a leech guy.
I think they just took the books.
Well, that's what happened at the meeting. I won't go into the whole story, but John Bisson did a bid on the project, and basically the competing makeup man said to the producers, you don't have to pay this guy because he knows the artist. You already own all the Swamp Thing work. And I got a call from Paul Levitz. The only time in my life, until about 3 weeks ago, that Paul Levitz had a conversation with me, because for about 4 weeks, John and I knew more about the Swamp Thing movie than DC knew. And I asked Paul Levitz, so why don't you know anything about the movie? And he said, this is a quote from Paul Levitz, we cut the worst deal we ever cut in licensing with Swamp Thing. When they sold the rights to Melniker and Uslan, the 2 producers who then did the Batman movie with Tim Burton, DC sold all rights for Swamp Thing for like a 10-year period. DC couldn't even do posters of Swamp Thing. The movie people could do anything, and they had access to any aspect of the book, past, present, or future, and that's why we were getting the lowest page rate. There was no merchandising in it for
And
DC.
it was worse than that, because they had also sold them the rights to all the characters that were in the original
Right.
Swamp Thing series, including Batman.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
That's like,
And you're right. And John and I actually got a call at one point from a lawyer friend of ours who had represented me, saying, can you guys pull together $10,000? You could buy the rights to Swamp Thing. And John and I didn't have a pot to piss in. We were like, oh, that would be great, but we can't do it. Do you remember that? It was Mike, what was that? Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but that's how
You
worthless.
should have called all your friends.
That was, yeah, well, all my friends had no pot.
None of us had any money.
But that's
In
how
some way, I
insane-
called my dad or something.
That was how insane the business was at that time. We could have bought the rights to the
The Swamp Thing.
So by issue 64 is the last Alan Moore, and all of you pretty much get to
Yeah, Tom
contribute
came back.
in that because you've got the segment, and you did the cover, and how was that? Obviously you knew that was
Oh, yeah,
kind of farewell.
Alan had set it up. He had discussed it with Rick, and then Rick talked to me. We were all still talking with Alan at that point in time, and Karen reached out to Tom.
Yeah, I was thrilled to get, because of course I had, labored on this thing and went, oh, screw it, and then it blasts off and turns the industry on its head and gets every award there is for 10 years or something. So, it was, man, on one hand, I was really proud of my buddies for really delivering. I had no idea it would do that. I knew they would do great work, but, so it was great for me to get to come back. And plus, I got a phone call from Alan Moore, who I had met on that one ill-fated trip he took to the States and went to San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And had a horrible experience with all these fans clawing at him.
Never came back to America.
Yeah, but I had met him there and we chatted and he said he wanted to do something someday. So anyway, it was nice that he was late. So I got the scripts by him calling me and talking on the phone for a long time and describing what he wanted me to draw.
Yeah,
Because he didn't have the scripts together, but I did get the scripts too. And so I got my little Alan Moore experience there on the 6 pages.
I think that's the only issue Alan ever did that on, was phoning in scripts, because I penciled my pages from a plot outlined and
No,
dictated.
he was really late with mine. He was writing in 8-page increments, and I called Karen, I'd be done, and I need more stuff. She called Alan the next day.
He'd fax?
No, it was before faxes.
Oh, that's right, express mail.
He would phone me and read it over the thing, even though it was all written and I was going to get it. He would phone me, but he would have written 8 pages overnight.
So, issue 65, it's Rick Veitch's turn to shine. And you did something which we don't see a whole lot of in comics, which is you kept it going. You kept the book going,
Yeah,
and it
probably-
was still a great read.
Yeah, it was a tough position to be in, and Alan and I think Steve and I made jokes about it being career suicide, because Alan and these guys, the impact of that series had been so great that, it was a tough, I don't think anybody else wanted to step into it. And I certainly at that point didn't have to step into it because DC was sort of courting me to do any sort of book I wanted. But I really loved the characters.
Well, you didn't just step into it. You didn't just say, okay, I'll write it. You said, I'm going to write it, I'm going to pencil it.
Well, I had to pencil.
Yeah,
You took on even more, you basically,
But still, it was I don't think anyone else wanted to do it. It was that big of a success, and Alan's shadow was so huge at that point.
Or I have to follow.
I love the characters, and I had a great working relationship with Karen Berger. So, I just decided to bite the bullet and do it.
One of the neat highlights of in retrospect, of your run was issue 84, where you got to play just a little bit in the world of Sandman.
Yeah. Well, first time I ever heard of Neil Gaiman is he called me out of the blue. He was trying to break into DC Comics, and I was mowing the lawn, and somebody brought me on the phone, and it was Neil Gaiman wanted to talk to me. And, I didn't really know who he was, but he had made some...
We met him at a convention through Clive Barker.
Yeah, he made some sort of inroads at DC, and they were going to use him, and we just started talking. And of course, I realized, after a couple of conversations, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. And he began to talk about Sandman. Very early on, he had this real vision for what Sandman could be. And, I was, talking to Karen, going, this guy, he's really got something.
And if you guys don't remember Abby's ex-husband,
He was the Raven.
became Matthew the Raven,
Right.
which was a major character.
And so I seed that into my Swamp Thing. It gave you a little taste of Sandman. I think it was the same month that Sandman
Debut.
launched.
Yeah.
To
The
get
Sandman
a
and Hellblazer was the first of what became the Vertigo line. Sandman and Animal Man and a couple other titles.
Yeah.
were all under Karen's stewardship, and so you were part of that whole period.
But I love, Neil had an understated way of storytelling, which was kind of in direct opposition to what we were doing with the horror of Swamp Thing. And I was immediately attracted to it. And, it obviously, I think it took like 5 or 6 issues. It didn't really take off. And then DC got behind it and gave away issue 8.
Yeah, early on with Sandman.
And
that's where the breakthrough point was. They had a giveaway issue. And everyone loves free comics.
So Rick, one of your, what I thought was, just an absolutely fantastic story was Swamp Thing going through time, and which unfortunately, didn't turn out so well. But when you, and we'll get to that. When you started it, and when you talked to DC, did you pitch them everything, or did you say, what, or when you started it, what?
This really begins with when I took over as writer. DC started to see me in a much different light. And they were looking for a new golden boy because Alan was leaving. And so not only did they have me on Swamp Thing, but they wanted me to think about doing these other mystery characters, and maybe I would do a crossover for Vertigo when I was down there. It was all at the same time that the Standards and Practices, Jeanette had released the Standards and Practices list. And
That was 86.
yeah, that's just when I was
Yeah,
taking over.
86, yeah.
And Alan quit, Frank quit, these guys quit, and I'm down in New York, and I'm finding out that all these guys have quit.
Yeah, we had already quit.
We signed that petition, which, we all,
Well, Frank told us first about that.
Yeah.
He somehow.
Frank Miller, right?
Frank actually was the catalyst for that.
We saw Frank at a Mid-Ohio.
Mid-Ohio Con. This day.
86.
86.
That's what year it was, yeah. And, one of the first things he sat down with us to talk about.
In the trailer. He took us out to the trailer. They had that trailer that we could go to
Whatever it was,
as
yeah.
visitors. And Frank grabs John and I and says, I've already talked to Bill Sienkiewicz, and I need you guys on board with this. We had a whole
Campaign, he was.
he was pissed.
So I'm down there when this all was exploding, and they're whining and dining me at the Time Warner lunch thing, and this and that. And I met with Karen and Jeanette, and I brought it up. I said, well, what about this list? And she said, it's not real. It's just for the publicity. There's nothing in there that's going to stop you from doing anything. I said, so I can do all this stuff. She said, just talk with Karen, work it out. We might adjust it a little, but anything that's on there, we can work with.
You didn't know when she said adjust things a little.
Except.
Well, no, wait a second. And one of the things on there was you're not going to show a religious figure in the DC universe. But I took it as a roadmap of things I was going to do.
Yeah. Okay, you gotta understand, Rick, John, and I, we grew up Catholic, and you get a forbidden list, that's the roadmap, the way you're gonna do it, am I right?
Right, that's another interesting element to these 3 guys, yeah. That I figured that out at some point. They're all so twisted. What is going on? And then I realized they were all brought up Catholic. I wasn't, see, so I was like,
You're free.
I was a little more well-adjusted, although I didn't know that.
I used to carry the Legion of Decency movie rating thing to track down and see all the condemned movies. It was like a flag, like, yes! And so for Rick to get a list of don't do this, made perfect sense.
But I had been promised that we'd be able to work it out, and I'm willing to try to work things out with people. So the time travel bit was because they were doing another crossover.
Invasion.
Yeah, and I needed to get Swamp Thing out of our reality, or I was going to be stuck with this stupid crossover. And they're so complicated, and all of a sudden you're dealing with so many editors. I just didn't want to hassle with it. So that was my solution. Let's send it back through time.
And again, a fantastic use of DC's more historical characters.
That was the other thing, is we were running out of characters to reboot. Alan had mowed down through them, and everybody was grabbing all kinds of characters, and the only ones that were really left were the ones back in time, the Golden Gladiator, Tomahawk.
One of my other absolute favorite comics, 87, where he goes back to King Arthur's time, and the future artist of Prince Valiant, gets to basically produce a portfolio of Prince Valiant art with the Shining Knight, and Prince Valiant is actually in the comic.
Prince Valiant and Gawain are in Swamp Thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
And it's all done in the horizontal.
Yeah, that was such a blast for me. That's probably my favorite Swamp Things. Were those two I did with Rick.
Tomahawk.
At the end of Rick. It was,
You know, that
was such
comes
a
back to
blast
part of the
get to do
chemistry
that.
between us. I mean, one of my first pro script job in comics was scripting a backup Sergeant Rock story for Tom, because he liked to draw swords. I came up with a whole war story about a sword.
And
right?
a sword fight. Yeah.
And you know,
World War II war story with a sword fight.
when Rick's doing Swamp Thing, you know, he knows Tom's tastes and loves, and this is how we all would work together. Wow, this is, Rick's doing the story for Epic, I need a BD panel to set. Come to page BD. You know, we knew what each other.
And it was the readers too, because Tom is the perfect artist for Tomahawk and Prince
I just love that stuff, yeah. I mean, I read Tomahawk comics, you know, when I was, before I really got into comics, I would read one once in a while. That was one of the ones I would read, you know, so. Yeah, that was a blast. I had a blast. And you did the thing where you turn the book sideways, because we all visited Williamson, who has Hal Foster originals of Prince Valiant that are this big, you know. And we said, we gotta do this so the pages are bigger. So we would turn the book sideways, and that's one whole giant page. Yeah, it was a blast. And it was very twisted and very, you know, much in keeping with the mood and attitude of the Swamp Thing series, but then it had this, you know, swashbuckling, you know, adventure element visually, but the story was totally twisted. King Arthur is a nutcase with his wounded head wound, you know, he's psychotic, you know.
And the neat thing is, you also have Etrigan in there, which is awesome, because a lot of that design work of his costume came from Hal Foster.
Yeah, that's right. Kirby swiping Foster's, you know,
Was
rib.
it a goose mask?
Yeah, he makes it. Yeah.
Prince
That
Valiant
incredible
War,
sequence in the
scare
first
people.
year, yeah.
Yeah.
So unfortunately,
Prince Valiant, yeah.
the book kind of goes away for 3 months, and the head of DC pulls the rug out from under you. Was that was Jeanette?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. I told him I wanted to do an issue set in, you know, time of Jesus, and that Jesus would appear in. And they said, okay, you know, what we need out of you is an outline. Type us up an outline and propose it. And Jeanette and Paul and Dick, I think, would work with Karen to make sure it was good. Did that. It was approved.
Right.
And I got their go-ahead to go ahead and do it. We were bringing in Zuli to do the art. Michael Zuli. I wrote the script in 2 pieces, just for time.
Yeah.
You know, so I wrote the first half of the script. Karen saw that. I believe she showed it to Dick and Jeanette and Paul. Then I wrote the second part. Zuli started penciling away. I wrote the second half. I believe that was seen by everybody up and okayed.
And Tom Sutton was inking already by that.
It was.
Tom Sutton was the inker.
But I think the breaking point was the cover. And Steve kind of had a little hand in this.
It always comes back to.
You know, if anyone puts a hand grenade in front of me, I'm gonna pull the pin.
I had come up with the idea of Swamp Thing as a crucifix, but I'd kind of drawn it, penciled it, so his face was sort of heroic. And he's a, you know, heroic crucifix. And Bissette looked at it and he says, no, Veitch, you gotta have him like one of those saints.
No, I was more specific. I actually showed you the Gustave Doré print. I was like, emulate this Gustave Doré drawing, because this is like the classic crucifixion.
We cut out in like
Exactly.
the back.
So, and Gustave Doré is too much for.
No, I think what it was the crucifix with the crown of thorns on Swamp Thing, and I think that was what they saw. They didn't see what they'd already approved anymore. I think. I really, honestly, don't know what happened.
Who knows how that.
Well, and they were also dealing with backlash at that time over the Mike Grell Green Arrow. There was the crucifixion cover where a prostitute is tortured on a crucifix. So I think part of it was you guys had in backlash.
Pretty yucky.
I think too,
I remember
the stuff I've been doing with their superheroes, I was moving toward Rat Pack. And I was doing Superman and giving him a dark shadow. and
They didn't
doing things.
want it.
And they were seeing that in me, and I heard that from various sources, that they were all of a sudden suspect, even though they thought I was gonna be a new Alan Moore.
And now he's got Jesus.
Well, they were suspect that I didn't understand heroism, but my thing was that there is a shadow to it, and I want to show that. So I was already kind of on the outside. I don't know if that might have had something to do politically. I honestly don't know why it all came out underneath.
And the gross irony in all this is the issue involved the Holy Grail, and the week issue 88 would have hit the stands is the week that Indiana Jones, what was the third film?
Last Crusade.
The Last Crusade. And, you know, DC would have had a comic with the Holy Grail as the Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Indiana Jones movie with the Holy Grail would have hit theaters.
The other big angle though was that Time and Warner's were merging right at that moment, so they were probably covering their corporate butts.
What about Salman Rushdie? Wasn't that back?
That was happening.
The issue was actually for Salman Rushdie. It was
Oh,
dedicated
before
to
that.
him. And we all knew that at the beginning. Everyone-
That's the story I always heard, is they were worried about a backlash similar to what Salman Rushdie was going through.
From who?
I made a huge mistake at that.
Yeah, right, they really were, I mean, I think.
It was
they
the
were
Reagan
concerned
era.
about-
Yeah, some crazy, gun,
The important thing is that I made a huge mistake in which I quit the book dead, and I should have finished my run. You know, it's for the fans, for the character itself, because the character just was destroyed, the whole thing. I kick myself now.
didn't quite recover.
Or was it that
Well, I don't know.
Wheeler stepped in with Tom to kind of
And Mike Hoffman.
a little bit of a final, and then, I mean, in terms of at least me being a fan, you know.
It wasn't the same, yeah. Yeah, that was, talking about hard act to follow, Doug Wheeler had a really hard act to follow.
He didn't know what I was doing, you know.
Yeah, and Karen had was like, oh boy, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So we skipped 2 months, and she got John and I, John did the covers, and I, came in and pencil, because then at least there was some continuity in the artwork, because I had done those last 2, and then Zuli's book didn't get published, and then I did 2 more. And his stuff was interesting. I thought it was kind of interesting. It wasn't Rick Veitch or Alan Moore. He wasn't setting the world on fire, but he had all these strange loose ends for time travel loose ends. Swamp things out there in the time ether. Where is he going to land? What am I going to do with this? And he got pretty psychedelic with it. But
So we start in 1982 with Adrian Barbeau, and we end in 1989 with Jesus. 7 years, a group of friends, pretty much, with the help of Alfredo, Karen, and Ron, every now and then you have
Ron
but
and
usually
Ron.
another friend help out.
yeah,
7
a lot of Cuba
years.
students.
Well, and
You
great
guys-
people like Sean McManus. I mean, part of what made it work was Len and Karen were such terrific editors. Karen in particular. I mean, we would see, Karen would troubleshoot, see where the gaps were coming in terms of time, and Alan would have a story that didn't fit how John and I drew, or how Rick drew, or how Alfredo drew. And Sean McManus, was perfect for the Pogo issue, and I bring that up just because Karen, her orchestration was great. She's one of about 3 or 4 editors I can think of that I've worked with who really cared about the story. She didn't see us as her pair of hands. Karen really cared about the narrative flow and so on. And even things like that decision to pull Nuke Face, we did it later, and she was right. By then, the readers were hooked and would go through a bummer 2-issue story because it was a horror comic and that fits. But Karen was really, she was way more than just a traffic cop or something like that. She really got the best work out of me I ever did for mainstream comics, and I was a pain in the ass to work with. Karen was great, and she understood where things would go wrong. It would be decent, management would throw a monkey wrench too big for Karen to field, and it would hit, me or Rick or Tom or John in the face, or Alan. When Alan stepped down, part of that was just the backlash from the whole Watchmen debacle of, putting out watches and trying to claim it was promotional instead of merchandising, and it's just like, why piss off your #1 writer? You got the tiger by the tail.
I mean, the unfortunate thing about the comic industry is that it has a history of the hell? It's a self-sabotaging, bizarre, publishing that is very hard, especially for me being an illustrator working in publishing that's not comics,
Look at the crash of the 90s. I mean, look at what the comic industry did to itself, in the 90s when it was just like on fire. All this fantastic, interesting, creative stuff's going on. The comic shops are going up all over the country. Everything's going great, and then they just
Speculate on marketing and let's exploit it.
Yeah, let's just blow
And
it.
the other irony too is that by the time Vertigo was in, books that have come out of Vertigo make what Rick was trying to do in Swamp Thing 88 look like, romper room by comparison.
Oh yeah.
But that was 2 years later.
Romper
That was,
room.
I tell you,
You guys know what romper room is?
I'm kind of old.
7 years of absolutely fantastic work. We're so grateful that you guys were willing to be here in Cincinnati. This is the 3rd year that we've had the show here. We're really working hard. Andrew Satterfield over there, is he still here? Is really, really trying to...
Thanks, Andrew.
Something special. Thanks to everybody.
Where is he?
I think he was
Fled.
Yeah.
Should we open up to questions? Before?
Yeah, that's
Because everyone's been
what-
really patient. We've been shooting
Oh,
them
yeah.
off for ages.
Yeah, question.
You, sir, there.
I'm just curious about the kind of coda story you did for Neil Gaiman.
Oh, the one that John and I
Jack
did?
and the Green?
Yeah,
Jack and Green?
and you wrote like at the end of the story, goodbye. Is that goodbye DC forever?
That was Goodbye Mainstream Comics. I mean, my return to mainstream comics is this month in SpongeBob.
Wait a minute, you wrote me one story.
I wrote you a Tarzan story. Thank you, Tom. No, that was
Short
before I
story.
said the goodbye.
Oh, was it?
I wrote it in '99, but that was my goodbye to mainstream comics. It had become such a toxic environment by then.
Stephen, as somebody who has been working on SpongeBob books for 6 years,
It was fun.
what are you doing?
Hey, Derek Drayman and Chris Duffy called me up and said, would you be into doing a SpongeBob? We know you're retired. And my daughter loves SpongeBob. My daughter's 29. My daughter loves SpongeBob. And
What's
I
not
just
to
thought,
love,
one of the things for me is my life has changed a lot. I'm a teacher now. I teach at Center for Cartoon Studies. And I try to do jobs every semester that I can show my students the next semester. And, I wanted to see what mainstream waters were like. And the page rate was phenomenal. It was 3 pages. They pay you shit, right?
Well,
They pay me a lot. No, that was a joke.
The truth is, I don't do the comics, I do the actual children's books.
You're doing the
Because-
books.
Because the comics pay like crap compared to the children's
Well,
books.
see,
What?
but for page rates in comics, it was just fun. It was a fun lark. It was 3 pages, and I didn't even get to draw SpongeBob. I penciled him, but they have their guy pencil him. and it's
Welcome
like,
to my
oh.
life, yeah.
So, it was just, I'm trying to get out there and try things, but when John and I were doing that Jack and the Green, I had it. That was it. I was done. It was over. I was managing video store.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes, you there.
You guys have like one of the most iconic runs of Swamp Thing I read. Almost every issue of Swamp Thing. And there's terrible, there's bad, there's good, and then there's what you guys have now going. It's just like amazing. And Rick, your work even, in my opinion, you caught some of that stuff. Like I love the story you did after Alan would run. But do you guys ever keep up with what's going on currently with those characters?
I have. I've been following Yannick Paquette, and who's the writer on the book right now?
Scott.
I've been following that. What's interesting on the current run, I just wrote a whole overview of the whole Swamp Thing chronology for an academic press book that's coming out. You want real money in comics? Write for the academic press where you're paid nothing and they own the copyright. So I had to reread the whole run, and right from the beginning. And where it's at now is interesting. But see, Rick was talking to you about how difficult the crossovers are. That's how they manage all of DC now.
Yeah.
So, and the other curious thing is for all the heat that Doug took when he took over writing Swamp Thing after Rick left, the current story is basically a revamp of the Matango storyline that Doug did, which was an idea I introduced in that annual I scripted that Tom Maindrake drew with the fungus, and they're just calling it the rot. But it's interesting where I'm going to stick with it, but already they have a crossover with Animal Man where I've got to read Animal Man to follow his, and you want to lose a reader who's 57 years old, start making me buy comics I'm not interested in buying. I'm gone.
What's interesting to me is how those guys are so obviously fans of your work. Like, Yannick Paquette always put your names on things, like there's a.
Yeah, Totleben or Bissette Motors, Totleben you had a restaurant, I think.
Yeah.
A good Italian restaurant.
There was a Yeates Motel, which I thought was pretty funny.
It's in a Veitch, son,
Yeah,
that's
it's really
great.
clever stuff where he,
I've
like,
seen
he
that.
obviously analyzes you guys in your work, so he kind of puts.
DC wouldn't let him put more,
Or Veitch.
or Beach.
That
Oh.
is, I did notice that. Yeah.
The companies can be petty and vindictive. The Dracula story that John and I did together with Steve Perry that we mentioned earlier, we dedicated that story to Mark Wolfman and Neil Adams because we designed that story to fit between their Origin of Dracula. Some of our panels fit between the panels of their Origin of Dracula. Marvel whited out the dedication to Mark Wolfman and Neil Adams because they were pissed at Marv and Neil at that time. And it's not that different from, Yannick being told, don't put more in Beach in there, It's like, come on.
Is there anybody else oh geez, Mr. Dirkman.
A question for Mr. Beach. With the new regime at DC, is there any chance of you talking to them about collecting and properly wrapping up your
There's been discussions for 15 years on pulling it together, and it's come very close a couple of times. But I have no idea since the new guys have taken over. I haven't heard from them at all.
One of the issues now is Tom Sutton is gone. I mean, Tom Sutton died, so we've already lost one of the people who was working on that Swamp Thing 88.
Was that last issue completed in any kind of usable form where they could reprint or were they acting in light work?
The pencils exist. The lettered pencils exist.
They were done.
I'm not sure who has that original art. I know Kevin Eastman owned it at one time, but I think he sold it. So it's out there somewhere.
Well, my question was actually, same question.
Anybody
But I thought
else?
that it come close, what was the hang-up then? Like they published Warren Ellis's Shoot, which they had canned at the time of Columbine, and they've gone back and then Kyle Baker's.
DC
Superman's
should, you know what would sell well for DC? They're always struggling. They should just do a year of printing all the stuff they refuse to print.
They've actually been doing it all, but they haven't.
They won't touch.
Swansea it is. I don't have an answer. It's really a question for those guys, and I think they're sick of getting it too, because it comes up at a lot of con panels with DC.
There's an issue of Ambush Bug. There's an issue of Ambush Bug that was written, lettered, drawn, inked, that was pulled because it was about the poor plight of the DC editor. Right? That was the whole joke of that issue. And DC reacted by firing the editor. Right? He comes into work and his shit is out of his office on the sidewalk in front of the Warner building. That's how he found out he was canned. I don't know. It's a weird.
Read what is it, Geeks, Monsters, and that Gerard Jones's history. Men of Tomorrow, History of Comics book by Gerard Jones, who is a DC writer, phenomenal book, and you'll see the roots of the dementia that dominates New York publishing, and they are very clearly spelled
DC's
out.
office used to have, this is just a little anecdote, but you guys will remember this. DC's office at one point in time, when we were trying to get work up there, had wall patterns that were blow-ups of Zipatone dots. Do you guys know what Zipatone is? And it's what they used to use in comics for toning.
Dot pattern,
And it was the dark to light pattern, but it was bright red against bright yellow. So you were in instant psychosis when you walked around. It was like art directed to drive you mad. And this is the environment they were working in. And there was a Clark Kent statue in the front room waiting. It was like,
Weird.
what is this place?
Is there any before we wrap up, you guys?
So one question is, the character evolved over time. Was there any frustration with the more and more tendrils that were added to Swamp Thing? And other writers had to draw it that way?
Tendrils?
Other writers
We
said-
kind of gave up before. But we got to do our bit, and then, I've read where the books go, but my emotional investment with the character is gone, which is too bad. I love that
Just
character.
visually.
His texture, you mean?
Oh, his texture?
No one got it like this guy. No one-
one.
Alfredo was good, but nobody gets it like this guy.
John, that stuff would just pour out of John's hands. When I was penciling Swamp Thing, after our first 3 or 4 issues, I would do a tight anatomical form for Swamp Thing, but I didn't get into the texture because John taught me he would do whatever the hell he wanted to do. And so I would focus on Abby and the other characters. But to me, John really defined from that first drawing that Tom brought in that Len shot down to what we got to do in the book, John really defined what Swamp Thing looked like. And you know, when we left the book, I even had a phone conversation with Karen and with Pat Bastian, who was editorial coordinator at that point, offering, John and I said, we'll do model sheets. This is before they were doing the DC Universe books. They said, why don't you pay us to do model sheets? Because we, you know, got the character to this point, and they wouldn't pay the $45 to John and the $63 to me to pencil and do the model sheets. And I don't know about you, Joe, but I field questions from artists. Michael Zulli would call me and go, how do you draw him?
Oh, yeah.
Because he had an odd build. You know?
Yeah, these guys changed them so much. When I went back and did them after these guys had redesigned them, I tried to draw them their way, and it was weird. It was weird. I dug it. In fact, when I very first got the book, I didn't want to draw him like Wrightson had drawn him because he was too clean and superheroized. I wanted to draw him like the House of Secrets version.
Yeah.
I really did, but I don't know if I just figured, oh well, you know, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'll just do it the way it is. But I remember I really liked the House of Secrets look of Swamp Thing better. He was mossier.
You know, even Bernie pulled the plug on a project he was doing with Len Wein. It was a Swamp Thing reunion of the two. Bernie showed us pencils. This would have been 91, 92 because it was at Tundra that we saw the pencils.
Len offered that to me, I remember.
Well, and
Bernie's
Bernie's
story, and I never heard about it.
I've never seen this pencil.
Yeah, and Bernie said to me, you know, I got this far into it, but you guys redefined the character. I end up drawing him like you drew him, and I don't want to do that. And he wasn't being vindictive saying that. In fact, that was the year Bernie got a bonus from DC in 91 or 92. They won't pay royalties to Len and Bernie on Swamp Thing, but they give them bonuses now and again when there's a big Swamp Thing year. And Bernie, without any of us talking to him, we all get a check from Bernie. He divvied up the royalty between Rick, John, myself, and Alan, I think, got a check. And because he said, you guys are the reason I got this bonus this year. And that's the kind of guy Bernie Wrightson.
Yeah, good for him.
You know, that was just out of the goodness of his heart.
Right. That's great.
And, but that was interesting because Bernie actually had drawn, I think, something like 25 or 26 pages and pulled the plug.
I think Len said something too about how working on Swamp Thing again was starting to bring back all these old memories that Bernie didn't want to deal with.
Oh, well, there you go. Working with DC, perhaps.
Part of it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any before we, yes, sir?
I'm just curious, you mentioned hiding pictures of Gumby in the art, and I was wondering how that began. And why?
We're assholes.
Next question.
You know, John, I'll give you that, for instance, when we were at Hubert School, and Rick and I just reunited with Ernie Passman, who was one of our classmates.
All right, Ernie, yeah.
Ernie and I, in our assignments, started what became dubbed the Whiteout Wars, where I would put on every assignment graffiti that said, Ernie eats shit. And
I remember that,
and
yeah.
Ernie would put a graffiti in his assignments that said, Bissette eats shit.
Right, I
And
remember that.
Ernie didn't go into comics professionally. He still draws, but he ended up going into computer science and stuff. So John started putting in his stories, Bissette eats shit as graffiti. And I put Totleben eats shit in a couple stories. And we actually went to a convention where somebody went, you guys are still talking to each other? Yeah, they thought we were having a
I stuck the city shit in the restroom where little Johnny Bates is getting raped or something.
That's right. and you know, we're having fun with this. So the Gumby thing was like, we both like Gumby, and we just started, it was like,
It was big and green.
yeah,
You know,
just like Swamp
weird
Thing,
head.
right? As it said. But we would do things like, there'd be a panel where a monster was upside down, and we would draw the silhouette as Gumby because Len started whiting him out or making us change it. And we finally stopped because I got a really angry call from Len going, I would put up with you being late with pages, but no more Gumby! But Tim, it was that spirit that led to Constantine. You know, we started drawing Sting, and it was that same sort of thing of like, hey, Alan, you better do something with this.
Did Sting ever see any of that stuff? He commented on it somewhere?
Did Keanu Reeves ever make a Gumby?
Not yet.
Give
What
it
did
time.
Sting say?
I still believe they cast Keanu Reeves.
Film to him at one point.
Oh, really? Wow.
But he saw the drawings of him, you think?
I think they cast Keanu because he was the least like Sting of any.
That'd be different, yeah.
Did you have another question, Tim?
No, I
I would-
was thinking, because I said they're both really very
Yeah.
and I was wondering if you were like tweaking Swamp.
Making more.
Getting into that self-expression.
We just couldn't get Pokey in. We were working on Pokey and we couldn't do it.
So I would love to see your work collected in DC's absolute format or some large, cleaned up remaster.
Bring it on, we'd like the royalties too.
Well, are you satisfied with the current editions?
You know, every time they go through a reprint, I'm sure some of you have noticed that, like, they'll reprint and they'll leave out lines of Alan's dialogue, you know. For 4 or 5 editions of the DC books, the last line of the Woodrow storyline was missing.
Right, one of my double page spreads is cut apart.
That's right, it's right, which makes it not work, because
Well,
you're supposed to
they
read it
did that
down.
with issue 34 too,
That's right.
you know, which was crucial.
Well, you know, there's a number of issues that may keep it from an absolute. Number one, we used to have to work around those ad pages, right? And it's part of why when they put the books together now, they don't sit right, because there was an M&M or a Reese's Pieces ad that went here, and the pages don't fit. And for the early reprints, John, they would take one of our pinups and just stick it in the middle of a story so that the pages would fall.
Yeah, if there's a double page spread, it has to be a left and a right, continuity has to be.
Yeah, and bear in mind, in 83, 84, 85, when we were doing this work, no one in the universe was thinking about reprint volumes. It was just, you know, get this book in and done. And Karen thought it was a pain in the ass that I would call her and say, okay, where do the ads fall? And she was like, why do you care? And I was like, because I want to know where the double page spreads are, because we want to work with the double page spreads. But then the pagination becomes an issue, because suddenly you've got an odd page that's not there, where there was an M&M's ad or a video game ad. That may be a factor.
That changed though, when I took over, they switched it, put all the ads in the back of the one. So I was able to do a lot of stories that were just double page spreads.
So yours would be easy pie,
Yeah.
you know?
But they still screwed it up one.
No,
It was one of our issues.
It was a Constantine.
It was number 37 was the one where they screwed it up. You know, and the editors are conscientious. I mean, the newest reprint edition, I worked with the editor, I wrote the intros for, I think, 3 of the volumes. And they've gotten a lot, I mean, he was great to deal with. I got to keep my own copyright on the introductions. What? You know, the deadlines were great. I made them all. The paychecks were in on time. They were really easy to work with. So there's conscientious editors that are in charge of those, but I don't know what kind of headaches they go through with marketing and so on and so forth. And who knows who came, I mean, I'm just glad they're in the hardcover editions now, even though that they're not definitive. They're handsome books. The best editions came out of Titan back in the 90s, and they put them out in black and white, and they solved all those problems because they actually had a dedicated staff that loved the work and saw it through. And
That's what it takes.
yeah, that's what it takes. But those dropped out of print after 2 years.
I love, if there's no more, okay, one
Just
more.
one small thing, you know, talk about adding things in. I think I saw in a couple of issues, every now and then we try to stick in, man. Did you ever think about trying to do
A crossover?
Yeah, no,
Well,
like,
there were, like in the Parliament of Trees.
yeah.
Man,
there
was in
was
there.
a sort of a, right.
I actually had to redraw that cover for the Parliament of Trees issue because I snuck in every plant monster from every comic ever done. And Karen, like, she would recognize a couple and go, Steve, you know, and you gotta change that before I send it to John. But I had Morlock 2001, Steve Ditko for Atlas Comics. You know, all the plant monsters were in there, but I had to tone them down. But Man-Thing was one of them. And Gumby was on that cover. And Karen repeated Len's edict, no Gumby.
Before we wrap up, I'd really like if you guys could take a minute and talk about what you're up to these days.
Start with Tom.
Well, I'm doing I had the most unbelievable year. Let's see, split up with my ex. I had 5 jobs going on Christmas last year, plus the moving out. Illustrating myths and legends for Anthony Horowitz, who's a popular writer. And these are kids' book illustrations for a UK publisher. I did a 24-page Tarzan story, which Al Gordon wrote with me, which actually was my plot. I pitched the idea, and they didn't like his ideas, they liked my ideas, so he had to write my story, which was really hard on him. But he did it. And I was doing still am, 150-page Western based on a Louis L'Amour novel for Random House, big graphic novel. which I'm painting in black and white. It'd be published in black and white. And then, on top of all this stuff, and I know there was one other one in there too. Well, then there's the...
Prince Valiant.
Well, the other one in there was Sergio Aragones and I are doing Gru meets Conan.
Oh, yeah!
And I'm drawing realistic Conan in the realistic world, and he's drawing cartoon Gru in Cartoon World. And Gru comes into Conan's world, and Conan goes into Gru's world. And it's really a blast. But he got sick. He got really sick, so all his projects are delayed. But I was supposed to be doing that too. And then I get offered Prince Valiant. And all these other jobs are going to end. At some point they'll be done. But Prince Valiant, then I will be there. And so I've been doing a lot. And Mark Schultz is writing Prince Valiant, and it's a great gig. And talk about a writer who's easy to work with.
And he's a sweetheart.
He's a
Mark
great
is one
guy.
of the greatest guys. He's a lot like Alan you know, so.
He is very much. But the cool thing about working with Mark is he not love, like I was saying with Al Gordon, he was really bummed that his ideas didn't fly and that they took my idea and he had to write my story, and that hurt his ego or something. A lot of writers are like that. I mean, as you guys know, like Marty Pasco didn't want your ideas, you know. But Mark Schultz wants my ideas. He wants all of them, and he loves them, and he's going to try and figure out, he puts stuff in all the time, and if something isn't working, he says, well, you just draw what you want, Tom, and I'll make the script work, you know, because that's great. Hopefully next year I'll be just doing Prince Valiant, and I could actually take a vacation.
So basically,
Come back to Ohio.
so what you're saying is you haven't been up to much.
This last year has just been nuts. And I edited The Big Lie right in the middle of that thing with this wicked deadline. We had to get it out by the 10-year anniversary of 911. I did that with Rick. That was really, yeah, that's right. It was that in the middle of all this stuff. So things have been crazy for me, yeah.
Mr. Rick Veitch.
I'm in the middle of a 3-year project with the University of Quebec. It's an educational comics gig. It's used in classrooms, workshops in classrooms, designed that help kids cope with social issues. And we use comics, little story comics, to kind of get the kids into whatever the issue is. And the teacher is trained to sort of bring the kids, out, like how do they feel about these kind of things. It's outside of the comics publishing world, I am so happy to report. It pays real commercial art rates rather than shitty comic book rates. And so I'm quite content and happy to be doing it right now.
Lucky you. Yeah, basically I take it easy these days due to my visual disabilities, which I'll explain in a little bit. I know a lot of people have questions about it and are maybe a little leery to ask, so I will explain some of that. Basically, what I've been doing is a lot of high-end commission work over the past few years, and maybe switching gears again recently, more recently I should say. I would like to get back into doing comics. They take me a hell of a long time to do anymore. But Rick is trying to get me into this program called Manga Studio, which he claims is cut your work down by 50%?
Maybe not 50, but 30%.
Quite enough, yeah. So maybe if I can get the hang of that, I can wheedle my way back into comics in some way. Basically, the visual difficulties I have are, I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, and what that does is it takes out your field of vision. So I have no side vision, basically. And the center vision that I have is restricted to about maybe, I'm going to say about 5 degrees, which is not much. This makes it difficult to do figures, keeping proportions, that sort of thing. So if I'm drawing a panel or a figure or something, I'm only seeing like just a little bit of it at a time. Like looking at maybe the size of a quarter on a this huge piece of paper. So I'm really scanning a lot of stuff visually as I'm going along. It takes a long time. With RP, you also get certain side effects like a specific type of cataract. So I've had cataracts removed. And there's really no reason why I should be drawing at all. It is a lot more difficult, but if if I could take on the workload like Yeates had,
Don't do it, I don't recommend it to anybody.
I would probably be dead. You know, but then I'm still able to do stuff, and I just have to do it at my own pace. The other thing is I've been taking a stab at getting more into doing some writing. So I'm going to see if that sticks. You know, playing around with writing some scripts, and I may even take a stab at doing some straight up prose writing. In fact, the funny thing is, over the years, even going back as far as the days when we were doing Swamp Thing, I once had Alan Moore tell me that I should be a writer because I keep coming up with all these great ideas and, you know, all these things, and he's just, you know, he thought, why not go for it, you know? Rick's told me the same thing over the years, you know, so have a few other people, and maybe I should have listened to Alan all those years ago, but, you know, I guess it's never too late, so I'm taking a poke at that, and, you know, trying to dig myself out from some of these commissions that I've still got lined up, but, you know, I'm going day by day, basically. So, and if any of you have questions about the eye disease stuff, don't be afraid to ask. I'm way past being sensitive about that.
Okay, I am writing. I always wrote and love writing, and thanks to friends like Chaz Ballin, who passed away a couple years ago, and Tim and Donna Lucas with Video Watchdog, I started in the late 80s, early 90s writing about film, which is one of my great passions, and that opened up doors for doing fiction writing. I was invited to write the Aliens Tribes novella that Dave Dorman did the illustrations for, and Dave packaged that. So I've never stopped writing, and I've got my first 2 ebooks that came out last week, collecting the film reviews I did in '99 and 2000, including some of the Video Watchdog reviews. And putting together my first collection of short stories, because I've written a lot of short fiction over the years. Comic fans are usually aware of the Hellboy story I did in Odd Jobs, but I do a lot of work that isn't seen in the comics industry. I illustrate at least a book a year, usually for the limited edition horror press, like Cemetery Dance and so on. Since 2005, I've been teaching. I was invited in on the ground floor with the Center for Cartoon Studies. And how can I resist? I was in the first ever class at the Kubert School where I met these greatest friends on planet Earth that I have, and I was invited to be on the other end of the classroom with a whole new generation of cartoonists. And if I got anything from Joe Kubert, it was, you know, when opportunity presents itself, pursue it. And Joe opened the door for us. So I took that invitation, and I've been there 7 years. I'm on sabbatical right now. I earned my first sabbatical. And I'm still drawing. I never stopped drawing. I just ceased to care about publishing and the comics industry, the mainstream comics industry in America. But every year I do odds and ends, and whenever my students ask me to participate in an anthology or something, I do a story for them. There's a couple mini comics on the table. If you want to come by tomorrow, I mean, there's an opportunity, I do it. And I continue doing comics, but you're not going to buy it from Diamond, and you won't find it in the comic shops. What's this table?
And it ended with
the table falling down. And right now, I'm also doing a book for Random House called S.R. Bissette's How to Make a Monster. It's a book on how to draw monsters. It's coming out under their Watson Guptill imprint, which is the outfit that did all those how to paint, how to draw books that we grew up with. And I'm having fun with it. I'm working with an editor named Patrick Barb, and I will teach you how to draw every monster in every category, my way. And I also recently got a publisher for Tyrant. So my goal for next year, starting in February, is to be working on Tyrant. We're going to take what was Tyrant 1, 2, and 3, my dinosaur comic, ending with the hatching of the egg. Michael Ryan, who's the paleontologist who opened the doors for me to the world of paleontology, the scientists that I could go to and ask questions. He is now the curator at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. When he was working with me on Tyrant, he was a lowly Canadian paleontologist living out of his car going to digs, and now he's here in Cleveland as the curator. So he and I are preparing the interstitial material for the book, So there'll be interim chapters that cover all the life forms, botanical and biological, that coexisted with Tyrant. And the publisher I'm going to be working with has 2 imprints. One's for kids and one's for adult readers. So there'll be 2 editions of Tyrant. One in color, where I tone down the more violent aspects of being a carnivore, and that'll be the kid-friendly version.
Tone down.
Hey, I proposed it. I would say probably half of my readership of 30,000 that I had in the mid-90s were kids. I got a lot of letters from kids. And the whole reason we put that together is there will be the black and white edition with the undiluted Tyrant, my
They won't
Tyrant.
want that version. They'll go buy the
The sweet colored one. Well, that was part of my thinking too. So knock on wood, I'll be back to Tyrant by next year. I'm wrapping up the book for Watson Guptill in December, and the way the book publishers work, we'll probably be tinkering on it until March or April. So that's what I'm doing, among other things.
Thanks again for all of you being willing to come here and come to Cincinnati and reunite and have hopefully a fun weekend.
Do we get to eat now?
Yeah, oh boy, it is now dinner time. If you like Oktoberfest, it's that way.
I better have food in my belly first.
Thanks so much. It's so great to see you guys, and for all of us that grew up reading your book, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.